Now back to our top story on how the government and unnamed anti-Labor sources are ramping up the scrutiny of Kevin Rudd. With the election looming, the Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, as one of John Howard's longest-serving ministers and closest political allies, has taken on a wide-ranging brief. As well as squiring world leaders around Sydney during APEC, he conducted secret talks with the Cabinet on the Prime Minister's future. And having secured his leader's retirement plan, Mr Downer seems set to play a key role in the campaign to re-elect him. His special subject is Kevin Rudd, having sparred with him for years when he was his Foreign Affairs shadow. Mr Downer also has some interesting things to say on reports of an Israeli airstrike on a Syrian nuclear target. But we began by talking about the ramshackle end to today's parliamentary question time. Alexander Downer, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Tony.
Now that the Parliament appears to have descended into a complete rabble, why not suspend it, put us all out of our misery and call an election straight away?
Well, as you know, that's a matter for the Prime Minister. The Parliament will serve an appropriate term, and we have a 3-year term and a little bit more than that, as is always the case under our Constitution.
It's not going too well, though, is it, the Parliament at the moment, if question time today is anything to judge by, and you have the slight problem of the Speaker barely able to control the House, having trouble articulating his rulings and losing the confidence of the opposition.
Oh, well, I think the opposition understand this for what it is. The opposition will always play up and attack the Speaker if it thinks it's worthwhile, and they have to be the masters of their own tactics. Their tactics today were an endeavour to disrupt the Parliament. I suspect, if I may offer a little professional advice here, that the reason for that was to cover up the embarrassment that Mr Rudd had over the tax scales earlier in the day, in the hope that they could get some material about the Parliament onto the evening news. You see that in politics from time to time.
But there are some substantial issues here. I mean, the Speaker ruled yesterday that it was acceptable for the Prime Minister to describe Kevin Rudd lying through his teeth. But today, 2 Labor members are thrown out of Parliament for using the same phrase. It appears inconsistent, at least, does it not? To Labor, they say it's biased.
Well, they weren't thrown out for what they said, by the way, and that's a point that the Speaker made. Maybe that didn't penetrate up into the press gallery, but that is a point that the Speaker made. They were thrown out for their behaviour, in particular for refusing to obey the instructions of the Speaker. They weren't thrown out for what they said. Well,
does that mean, incidentally, that it's going to be acceptable in speeches and in other forums in the Parliament for the term lying in their teeth or lying in your teeth to be used by the opposition against government ministers and the Prime Minister himself?
I'm not the Speaker. I couldn't really say what rulings the Speaker will make on that. We've got another day of Parliament tomorrow. We've had 3 years of Parliament. I don't know whether the Parliament will come back in October or whether it won't. It won't come back in November, you could be sure of that. It's conceivable it could come back in October. Look, I mean, day by day, the opposition use different kinds of tactics in the Parliament. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Usually when they're under a lot of pressure, they get into these kind of procedural issues. That's part of the nature of Australian politics. People say things about each other in the Parliament the whole time.
Do you think, just to sort of finalise this issue, I mean, do you really think, though, it is what the founders intended and what the voters want, to see a Parliament so completely dominated by the majority government that they can orchestrate proceedings pretty much at will, and that the Speaker seems to back them on that?
Well, with the greatest of respect, I think that's, not that I would accuse you of this, but that is putting the question from a very Labor perspective. Sorry to tell you, I've been a Member of Parliament for a very long time. I will never forget the abominable way the Parliament was abused during the Hawke and Keating years, and the simply disgraceful performance of speakers like Leo Macleay. They were entirely and unashamedly partisan. It was a disgraceful performance. I think in the last few years, look, the Parliament is the Parliament. There's no need for the Labor Party to be babies about this. They have the majority in all of the state parliaments, every single state parliament they control around Australia, and they ruthlessly use that majority. I think the Parliament in the last few years, it's robust and lively and so on, but I think it's worked better in the last few years than I've seen it work in my time in politics.
Mr Downer, on the leadership issue, was it your intention after sounding out the cabinet during APEC to ensure that there was a clear leadership succession plan made public by the Prime Minister in order to put to rest this issue once and for all?
Well, I think the way it's all worked out has been very good, and that means that I think the fact that the Prime Minister has levelled with the public, he's made it clear that he won't be running again in 2010 as the Prime Minister, and that Peter Costello is his logical successor, will take over as the Prime Minister. I think that does demonstrate to the public a couple of things. First of all, under John Howard, we have continuity and stability, but down the track we have a very substantial option for renewal in the form of Peter Costello, a young and very dynamic political leader. And I think more than that, you see, the thing about Peter Costello is that as a minister, as the Treasurer, he has been simply extraordinarily successful. So I think it's a good package to present to the public.
But did you come to the conclusion after your talks with the other cabinet ministers and during your talks with the Prime Minister that only a public announcement would actually put this thing to rest?
Well, I'm not going into what I personally thought or said, and you probably won't even read that in my memoirs. I'm a foreign minister, you know. Discretion comes very naturally to me. I don't go into what I privately think and say to people. It doesn't get you anywhere. But I think
might get you quite a good price from a publisher if you do want to write everything that you know into those memoirs.
I hate to spoil my own prospects, but I really don't respect the kiss and tell approach to public life at all, not at all. Look, and as far as I'm concerned, I think what has turned out here has been exceptionally strong. I mean, I think what we offer the public is strength, continuity, a great record, but the capacity to keep building on that record into the future, not just with John Howard, but also in time with Peter Costello. And we do, I mean, unashamedly, and the commentators have talked a fair bit about this, we don't just offer our leaders, we offer our team. We offer people of enormous experience, not just as ministers and in politics like myself, but people with great experience like Malcolm Turnbull in outside fields, which we are quite happy to put up against the Labor front bench, which is completely dominated by former trade union officials.
But since all the panic of that particular week during APEC was actually driven by what now appears to be an aberrant news poll 2 weeks ago, was it all pretty much unnecessary? I mean, the Prime Minister didn't have to, in the end, make all those statements unless there was a kind of leadership issue looming. The news poll, the latest one, put that to rest.
Well, look, you know, the polls do go up and down, and whether it's a problem with the sampling or it's the volatility of the electorate and so on, I've always said this, by the way, I don't think you should get too excited about them one way or another. I think any good government will target on the finishing date, that is polling day, and make sure that their strategy is strong and in place to get them successfully re-elected. I think what the Labor Party has done under Kevin Rudd is come out with a whole series of different stunts and statements and so on, none of which amount to very much, in order to try to boost their polling standings. But my view, by the way, is that as the election draws near, and there's an old saying, never underestimate the intelligence of the Australian public, the public will start asking themselves a lot more questions about the substance of what Kevin Rudd and the Labor Party are about rather than the stunts.
I'll come to that. Now, when you talked all this over with Mr Howard after taking your soundings, was Mrs Howard there as well?
I'm not going into personal details of meetings I have with anybody, be it John Howard or President Bush or President Putin or, well, President Yeltsin in years gone by, whoever it may be. I'm not going into that.
Not even who was present at the meetings?
It doesn't matter.
Well, it will matter to political historians when they try and write the detail of what was pretty much an extraordinary week in politics. I mean, you deny...
Well, goodness knows what the historians will write.